2023 was a great year for cinema with fresh ideas and new franchises that captivated millions of moviegoers on the big screens. From historical dramas like Oppenheimer to the rise of video game adaptations, it was quite a refreshing year in the industry, although there is one genre that was left in the shadows: the horror genre. Hey guys, welcome back to the Replay Media. Today, we'll be vindicating the horror cinema of 2023, in which we had a variety of films that included reboots, sequels, and adaptations. However, there were also some auteur cinema and original productions that prove that the genre is still more alive than ever. Without further ado, let's take a look at the 10 best horror movies of 2023. Renfield, directed by Chris McKay. Let's start with the softest on the list, although Nicolas Cage's Dracula has some chilling moments, and some that will make you laugh like never before. Beyond Cage's incredible performance, this film revolves around his assistant, Renfield, who, after centuries of servitude and bringing victims to the Prince of Darkness, decides to take charge of his own life. The problem is that he doesn't know how to break that relationship of dependence, much less when it comes to Dracula. Sure, it's a comedy, though it has more violent scenes than you'd think, and plenty of references to classic Dracula. Renfield is a top-notch film with a B-movie soul, combining action, horror, and comedy with great intelligence. Uncomplicated fun, a lot of heart, and terrific chemistry between the famous Count and his assistant, played by Nicholas Hoult. Nicolas Cage is an absolute hit as Dracula, so now we wonder what he would be like in a pure horror movie. Only the future will tell. Infinity Pool, directed by Brandon Cronenberg. I'm sure you know the saying, like father, like son. Well, Brandon Cronenberg took it too literally. Infinity Pool takes us to the fictional country of Litoka, where a writer and the heiress of a publishing empire do not dare to leave their hotel because of the extreme violence and insane laws of the place. But a harmless excursion causes them to face their worst fears. The hedonistic terror, reckless violence, and surreal horrors of vacation resorts are laid bare in this film, which is as uncomfortable as it is fascinating. Like his father, Brandon Cronenberg relies primarily on body horror to expose his own ideas about human relationships, the flesh, and the hidden fascination some have with violence. With the modern scream queen Mia Goth and the talented Alexander Skarsgård as the main figures, this story is a roller coaster ride straight to hell. Saw 10, directed by Kevin Gruder. Nearly 20 years after its first film, the Saw saga refuses to die, with its 10th installment as proof of that. Just like its famous antagonist Jigsaw, this franchise always comes back from the dead. Set chronologically between the first two installments of the franchise, Saw 10 focuses on the villain, John Kramer. Desperate and sick, he travels to Mexico to undergo an experimental and very risky treatment in hopes of curing his deadly cancer. However, the operation turns out to be a scam, which renews John's thirst for blood. Generally, horror sagas that exceed 5 films lose quality, let alone those that reach 10. Although Saw has nailed it with this installment, full of nostalgia and gore. Despite the intricate traps and the body horror, the story isn't morbid for free. Instead, it presents you with a moral dilemma about who's worse, the torturer or the victims. Scream 6, directed by Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette. Few franchises reach their 5th installment by not only maintaining a high standard of quality, but by paying a proper homage and at the same time bringing something fresh to the existing universe. The Scream saga not only proved to be one of those, but allowed itself to go above and beyond. Following the events of the 5th installment and the legacy of the director Wes Craven, Scream 6 revolves around the 4 survivors of Ghostface's massacre in the town of Woodsboro, who tried to leave the horror behind in New York. Ghostface has never been in a big city before, but there's a first time for everything. It is worth noting that Sidney Prescott, the famous character played by Neve Campbell, did not return for this installment, although in her place we had the return of Kirby Reed, a character from the 4th part. All in all, Scream 6 is an enjoyable sequel that paves the way for newer audiences while maintaining its essence of whodunit disguised as a slasher. Five Nights at Freddy's, directed by Emma Tammy. I admit this choice was made by my inner child because while it's far from being scary, it was a dream come true to see the animatronics from Five Nights at Freddy's on the big screen. With Josh Hutcherson at the lead, this adaptation of the famous video game saga created by Scott Cawthon introduces us to Mike Schmidt, a young man with a tragic past who must provide for his younger sister. As a result, he has no choice but to accept a lousy job as a night security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a restaurant that has been closed for years, although at night is quite alive. With a proper budget, Blumhouse was able to recreate the animatronics to perfection along with their iconic pizzeria. While the horror scenes are somewhat simple, the atmosphere makes up for it all. True to the lore of the video games, Five Nights at Freddy's explores the horror in psyche and trauma rather than delving into explicit violence and gore. It has a tone of seriousness that few video game movies can boast, and a script that hides more than it tells. And if you're a fan of the saga, I'm sure your inner child enjoyed it as much as mine did. A Haunting in Venice, directed by Kenneth Branagh. At first glance, it seems that this movie doesn't fit at all in this list, and I thought the same until I saw it. Undoubtedly one of the biggest surprises of the year, and a more than necessary twist to this mystery saga. After World War II, Hercule Poirot retired and is in self-imposed exile in the most glamorous city in the world. There, he reluctantly attends a seance in a ruined and haunted mansion. However, when one of the guests is murdered, the detective is plunged into a sinister world of shadows and secrets. With big names like Michelle Yeoh, Tina Fey, Jamie Dornan, and Ricardo Scamarcio, Kenneth Branagh finishes this trilogy based on Agatha Christie's novels with some of Edgar Allan Poe's gothic horror. The result is a whodunit film with vengeful ghosts, ancient curses, and a Venetian mansion so vivid that it could well be another murder suspect. Evil Dead Rise, directed by Lee Cronin. While the heart and soul of the Evil Dead franchise is the legendary Ash Williams, films like Evil Dead Rise show us that anyone can wield the chainsaw if they're brave enough. Directed by Lee Cronin, the film follows Beth, a young woman who, on a complicated night, pays an unannounced visit to her older sister, mother of three. This reunion quickly turns into a nightmare when the children discover something evil in the basement of the building, something called the Book of the Dead. With liters of blood, shotguns, and chainsaws, Evil Dead Rise succeeds in its goal, presenting a fresh story for newcomers to the franchise created by Sam Raimi. With its ups and downs, it maintains its intensity throughout its hour-and-a-half length, sustained in large part by a brutal performance from Alyssa Sutherland, who is the living example of a mother loving her children to death. Thanksgiving, directed by Eli Roth. Since we are talking about gore, it is impossible not to mention Thanksgiving, not exactly the holiday, but the film by Eli Roth, who, after 10 years away from horror films, has returned with a slasher as entertaining as it is bloody. Based on the fake trailer seen in Tarantino and Rodriguez's Grindhouse, Thanksgiving is set in the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts, where the fourth Thursday in November is the most celebrated day of the year. But an uninvited guest has arrived, and this year there will be no leftovers. Many of us were missing the spirit of that over-the-top Eli Roth we knew in Cabin Fever and Hostel. Well, it's my pleasure to announce that his latest film is all that, loaded with elements that remind us of the 90s and the VHS explosion. From the suffering of the killer's tortures to the darkly humorous storytelling, Thanksgiving is a thrilling experience that pays homage to classic slashers. Knock at the Cabin, directed by M. Night Shyamalan. You may have been disappointed by the end of the Unbreakable trilogy, and you may have found Old to be a boring movie, but I guarantee that Knock at the Cabin marks the return of the best version of M. Night Shyamalan. Based on the novel by Paul Tremblay, this film revolves around a family vacationing in a cabin away from civilization. Everything was going quite well until four strangers show up and turn them into their hostages. hostages, forcing them to make an impossible decision to avoid the apocalypse. With an incredible genius for building atmospheres and developing his characters, M. Night Shyamalan presents us with this psychological thriller that flirts with the end of the world and the home invasion that will give you the creeps. Sometimes, horror just needs a few talented actors, a small space, and a script that makes it clear that the scariest thing isn't what you're seeing, but what you're imagining. Talk to Me, directed by Danny Filippo and Michael Filippo. I may be cheating with this film as it was originally released in 2022 at the Adelaide Film Festival, though A24 acquired its rights to release it last year in the United States. Besides, any opportunity is a good one to talk about this debut from the Filippo brothers, who climbed to greatness from their YouTube beginnings. Talk to Me follows a group of teenagers who use their cell phones to conduct a seance using an embalmed hand that allows them to communicate with the dead. After a series of voluntary possessions, one of them goes too far and unleashes an evil entity that doesn't intend to return alone to hell. Perhaps the premise sounds generic, though the Filippo brothers twist the possession subgenre a bit with a story that takes teenage angst a step further while shaping some terrifying scenes with impeccable camera work. Talk to Me is a love letter to modern horror as well as an instant classic. It's an example that the new generations have great stories to tell, and we can rest assured that the horror genre is safe in their hands. And so, we reach the end of this list full of famous sagas as well as new faces. Beyond their premises, they all have one thing in common. They dare to experiment with new things. Perhaps modern horror hasn't come close to the greatness of The Exorcist, but we are undoubtedly at the beginning of a golden age, or rather, a dark one.